Hi, my name is Eugene,
And I'm Chris.
and this is our podcast entitled Deepening the Conversation. Today, we have our guest participant, Ellen. Thank you very much, Ellen, for joining us. And just give us a little bit of a background, how you were raised, where you were raised, and where you live now, and your connection to the work that we're all doing together.
I am currently living in Los Angeles for the last 20 years or so. I was born and raised in Detroit, and it's very dear to me, that city, even though I left it almost immediately after college when I was in my young 20s. And I moved to Chicago. So I am a city person, and I really identify with that. So I have usually lived, or always lived, in apartments, usually in neighborhoods that aren't that diverse, the way cities are segregated, but always in the city, so that I was on the subway, on the bus, at the grocery store, in the park, with people who are Black, people who are Latino, people who are Asian. And again, that is important to me and always has been, as making a richer, better life for the planet, I guess. I mean, all of us just living together, getting to know each other, learning. I did mention Detroit, and one thing, when I was a very young girl, the Detroit uprising took place. We used to call it the Detroit riots in 1967. And that definitely had an effect on me in conversations I had going forward with family, with friends, and just as a white person navigating her way through the world, through a world full of racism, injustice, and trying to see where the diversity, equity, inclusion can be built upon in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, in our friends.
So in the workplace versus the home, we were talking earlier that sometimes there can be a contrast. I'm just going to throw out for all of us to think about out loud. Is there a sort of a cognitive dissonant experience of sort of the forced institutional diversity in the workplace, and then sort of the comfort of home, maybe as sort of like an escape or a refuge from that? Or is it something that workplaces who strive for inclusivity with training and hiring policies kind of make it an emotional liability to live with, and then you feel like you get to escape that?
I find I work in a very diverse workplace. In the group of people I work with who are in my same classification, it's a very large organization. I am the only white person. There's maybe 10 of us in the same designation. I find it extremely valuable. And I've always worked I was self-employed for 20 years, but in other jobs I've had, whether I'm teaching or I was an editor and writer for many years. I have always been involved in diverse working situations. And I find then coming home to my more segregated neighborhood, although I'm living in the city, it still seems, whether I'm in Detroit or I'm in Chicago or I'm in, my neighborhood now is very diverse, actually, but there's definitely a difference. And I think that it's so valuable that the workplace is trying to do that, when an organization is trying to do that, whether it's public or private. It's great. And conversely, it makes the coming home to the whiteness it seems lesser again, I live where I live right now is so diverse, and I'm on the bus and the subway. Well, I was pre-COVID, so I'm having daily interactions with people of all different colors and faiths. It's a good thing.
So I imagine, Ellen, that operating in spaces that are culturally and ethnically diverse, that's added a sense of, it's also, probably broadened your perspective on life in general. Would you mind going a little bit into how you feel, having conversations with people from varying backgrounds has, affected, has infused your life intellectually and in your personal relationships?
Mhm. Sure. When I have friends who are, when we're talking about our childhoods, the difference perhaps. Now I grew up, I might be quite a bit older than somebody I'm talking to. And, we had a bunch of kids in our family. There wasn't a lot of money. But still, when I'm talking to a friend, my Latino friend now, who 5 of them, good friend, living in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I'm like, how can that be? I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with my husband. It's like, oh, it feels so small. And, I'm talking to my friend, who I'll call Susan. That's not her name. And she's telling me how it goes down. And it's like that kind of thing, just learning how other people live it's just so good to know. It makes you like, you don't assume you know anything when you learn how other people are living. And I think that's a good place to be, not assuming you know anything. And you can learn these things by developing friendships and talking to people and sharing your stories. And you can also learn them by reading novels. I've talked to both of you how I think it's so important. I mean, reading is very dear to me, and just reading fiction all my life, learning how other people live, how other people practice their faith, the way other people look at things. And then more and more in the past decade plus, intentionally reading books by Black writers, by Asian American writers, by LGBTQ writers, so that I'm getting those stories too on the page. And in relationships, I'm trying to intentionally foster with others. It's hard because sometimes it just feels so clumsy. Sorry.
Hard and clumsy is the 5-year-old driving the
Yeah.
car experience, and
Yeah.
it is awkward, but there is that one day suddenly in this overall trajectory, maybe in our lifetimes, and it could be for those of us doing the work, where you see that dog run across the road and the foot goes on the brake without even thinking. And we don't remain at that 5-year-old driving in the car
Mhm.
experience forever. But let's go into there's been a lot of effort by large institutional organizations at integration, at representing the ideal, and then the personal disjunct is sometimes uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And so we have those outdoor dining experiences with the person who maybe isn't doing the work, and something not quite right in our heads sort of flips off the other person's tongue. How do we integrate with that? How do we engage with that, working towards a peaceful society?
I think that it's a responsibility. It's not only a responsibility, but it's not an honor. That doesn't sound so right, but you've got to keep trying and learning how to ask the question, and that happens. And you're definitely the 5-year-old driving the car for a long, long, long time. And I bet the 5-year-old comes back again and again, even if you've done it. Even after a few times you've done it, you're like, hey, I really handled that well, And then the next time it's like, oh my God, what did I do? What did I say? Or what didn't I do or say? Because it depends. The stakes can be different in every situation. Sometimes it can be more difficult to, one-on-one situation where it's a good friend, it's a friend. That can be really rough. And a different kind of rough than a one-on-one situation with a person who's not really a friend, an acquaintance, maybe even a stranger, but who says something that, no, there's no way I'm going to be quiet in the face of that thing that was just said, whatever that thing is. And there's group dynamics too. And then I'd say it can be the same way. I mean, if you're in a group situation and you know everybody well, the stakes are different than if you're in a group situation where you don't know people as well. But what are the stakes? I mean, a lot of times the stakes are just one's own ego. I don't want to be that person all the time. I don't want to mess it up and look dumb. I don't want to see, like, there's a lot of stuff you have to peel off and let go of, but it's not a question of it feeling rewarding when you do it. It's just when you do it though, there's a feeling of like, okay, like a good, okay, I did that. I said, so, I took those steps. I crossed over. I gave that a step, however it went. And a lot of times it goes pretty well, especially as people are starting more, I think, I hope. And, attention has been focused thanks to the work of people like you two doing these conversations and this teaching and guiding that you're doing. Black Lives Matter. Many of our leaders, our new leaders, I'm a political person in that I just love politics and pay close attention. So, there are leaders that we have on state and local levels that make me very excited.
Yes, Ellen, I wanted to ask, when you were mentioning that, just having these conversations, you can feel productive and they can feel a surge of pride that you were able to stand up for a group that doesn't get the sense of respect that it deserves. Maybe this is more for those who watch this. What transpires or what do you notice happens in these conversations that are more successful?
What I have noticed from learning to initially step back a little and be quiet and listen instead of something that my first impulse is often maybe repeating myself to pounce and then lecture. It's just the bad impulse. Okay, fine. I'm feeling that, I notice it. So when I step in more quietly after a while and inquire about a statement the person made, what did you mean by that? We all learned this. White people all learned about 20 years ago, when somebody says a racist joke or a sexist joke in front of you, just say, why do you think that's funny? That's one way to approach it. There's many ways, but I think that was good advice. Like, why are you laughing at that? Why is that funny? Why are you telling that? Help that person make your stand and maybe help that person understand, or maybe, that's just the jokes that person's going to tell their whole life. But back to your question, or back online a little more, just the sitting back for a while and listening. And sometimes you sit back for so long and you're so quiet that the person, maybe this is with your friends who know you and they're used to you, they notice and they ask you, what do you think about that? And that happened to me recently with a really productive conversation with two friends. And it was great to hear my friend ask me, so then I could say, well, he was talking about the climate changing. He was actually talking about the theater. He was talking about transphobia. He was talking about trans people, insisting, as he was saying, correct pronoun uses and stopping rehearsals because, their pronouns, they were misgendered, and saying how the climate has changed. And the conversation went on. I didn't say anything, and he was just watching me. We were Zooming, of course. And he said, well, what do you think about that? And my response was just, well, maybe the climate before wasn't really so great for everybody else. It was pretty good for you, but everybody else was too hot or too cold. And we went out from there. We had a really good discussion about it. So the stepping back, the being quiet, the listening more, if you know yourself and you're a pouncer like I am, just try to don't do that first impulse. Just listen.
That's very, very helpful. And I often say it could be just as simple as tell me more, because there's no inflection of right or wrong within that, because if the person has the opportunity has done some inquiry within themselves, that's where the fundamental change can occur. I always encourage the neutral inquiry and discovering where the various myriad of doors are open and where the ones are closed. Your story reminds me of back in the 90s and the early 90s, right after the defeat of I think it was AB 101, my apartment building in West Hollywood, we had just been out marching the streets. People were arm in arm and holding hands with strangers, and we were just crying all the way down Santa Monica Boulevard, and we didn't know each other. And our apartment building had 8 units, and that winter we decided to have a progressive dinner party because we didn't know each other. We didn't talk to each other. We didn't know anything about each other. And it was just an opening of the door of these are the people that I park next to and say hi, who helps with groceries once in a while when something drops and so forth. And I remember we all had, the group of 8 of us, we had, I don't remember whoever was hosting appetizers. I guess I had the soup meal portion of that night. We all discovered was a porn star. And just like the 7 of us were like, because it begins to question our own individual social constructs, understanding of our integration into social norms or not, our biases about past relationships and the whole gamut of things that prompt can give. And we were just silent, but we just continued to have a good time. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how to move from intentionality, grounded intentionality, to a more embodied action. It's one thing to sign up on a text message to show up at such and such park because such and such happened in the country on XYZ date this week, and then to feel a sort of self aggrandizing arrogance within oneself that you've done your thing. How do we move from intentionality to an embodied action that isn't any of the extremes, the extreme of retaliation, or the extreme of the once in a while I'm going to do my march thing?
showing up is important. And I understand that, that idea of, you know, performing your allyship, your anti-racism, and it can make me very nervous or self-conscious. But the thing that I keep telling myself is just don't show up once, you know, don't show up twice, don't show up 3 times, just show up, show up, show up. You know, march literally or metaphorically 10 times, 20 times. Keep educating yourself so that you have the language to express your hopes, the things you're noticing. And also, you know, when you show up literally and metaphorically, you do start making relationships. I mean, you meet people, you know, you see some of the same people when you sign up in your council district and their volunteer corps, and, you know, you go clean up this, or you go help people get vaccinated, or you go, you know, help people experiencing homelessness in whatever fashion your council district is asking you to do. When you show up for your for BIPOC and let people know, I'm here, look at me. No, don't look at me. That's the thing. Like, don't center me. I'm not the white person showing up and saying, look at me. I want to be the person, and I'm trying to be the person who shows up and says, you know, what can I do? How can I help? You know, get to work, just be quiet, follow. I don't know I don't know any other way than to just show up and say, I will do this. I don't know, and be open to making friendships too. I think it's really cool to just, I was telling my husband this morning that I'm developing this very slow friendship with a woman that I've been seeing her on my bike ride every day for the last year. And I wear t-shirts that usually have some political slogans, so somebody knows, if people know where I'm coming from, you know, from a million miles away. And I could tell she would always wave to me. So we started talking, and, you know, her name's Iffy. She's from Jamaica. So we we don't see each other every day, but, you know, once or twice a week, and we're starting to share information about ourselves. And I was like, I think we're almost at the point where I could say, hey, you know, do you want to meet for a cup of coffee sometime or something, you know? So to me, that's showing up too, just like being open to say hello to people, you know, wave to people, like let people know where you're coming from. And you don't have to wear a t-shirt that says F Trump like I do, but you can do it in a way that works for you, but just show up.
You bring up a good point, Ellen, about you know, going to volunteer opportunities or volunteer events, and, you know, forming a community. I think overall in America, you know, if you look at the statistics, are very, you know, across all demographics, people are feeling more lonely. And I guess in a way, you know, a lot of the reaction on the right could be because of a deep sense of loneliness and, you know, dislocation, because they're, you know, the sense of what they thought was community no longer exists. But you know, in a lot of ways, community can help propel someone to become more involved, because you make the social contacts, and it becomes a little bit easier to show up. I mean, like, I know before starting this course, I was a little nervous, but, you know, meeting Eugene and forming a relationship with him made it easier. So, yeah, so I think you're really onto something with, you know, that initial, you know, pithy, you know, advice us to show up, but also, you know, trying to make a community from that, and, you know, have it be more, you know, beneficial overall to yourself and those the services serving.
So we've covered some really good tools for engagement in the conversation and deepening the conversation. It is just the initial part of the conversation. those uncomfortable situations. What do you mean by that? Or tell me a little bit more.
Mhm.
Or I really like the tool of the extended listening part, because if you allow the other person who may have a bias, is expressing a biased story or view or opinion, that silence plus that extended listening, which isn't natural to many people, can possibly serve as a mirror for them to look. So, but beyond say the door is open and there is engagement with somebody that you have a talking relationship with, what are the questions that go deeper, the ones that question the biases, the ones that question, why do you have that, why do you what you mentioned, why is that funny? That could be, in this second category. So what are some of the second category questions to go deeper when the opportunity arises?
I think it can be interesting and maybe useful to try to get at why do you feel that way? Why are you expressing that? Maybe you would start to understand if maybe that is the question, not, what did you do or what did you say, but why did you do that? Why did you say that? There was, after, this was last summer, late May, early June, when Black Lives Matter was leading peaceful protests all over the country, millions of people. There was also, in some spots, looting going on, and what was characterized as rioting going on. And there was that activist, oh man, this woman was so good, Kimberly Evans in Black Lives Matter. If you guys haven't seen it on YouTube yet, it was amazing. And then Trevor Noah interviewed her on the Daily Show a couple days after, and she was getting at, this woman was explaining why is the big question. So she was, her metaphor for why looting was going on, that had to do with the game of Monopoly, is in and of itself really instructive, so smart, not funny, because she's angry and really expressive and very clear while she's doing it. But I think something like that really helps people understand something they really can't. It's people are looting and that's okay. I definitely got off the track, but I got excited about the question of asking why, because that's a big part. If you look at this just 6-minute YouTube clip of her saying, the question isn't, what were they doing? The question is, you have to figure out why. And that's something we've been seeing again and again in the reading we're doing and the things we're learning through this course, just when we learn about the economic underpinnings of slavery, of this country, capitalism, and how we built our wealth on the backs of people that were enslaved and that were never paid. And the idea of, reparations, whether you're for or against them, would not be a gift. They would be a debt paid. As Marianne Williamson said that famously in the one presidential debate she was in, or one of them. It's like, no, we owe this money to people. We owe it to people. I really got off the track there, but why seems to be important to me.
Why, in general, leads to more exploration, because you're coming from a place of opinion and you're having to do more thought. Whereas what is, it's like, we're getting at, it's not as deep of a question. As we're asking why to various people, does anyone have any sense of, Eugene was mentioning embodying, is there a certain sense of presence or intent that we should have with these questions, with these deeper questions?
yes. I mean, we're trying to move toward a place of a society and culturally where we don't look at the telling of the story of Black people as denigrating the stories of white people. And other people that we don't talk about as much also. Even in this conversation, I focus mostly, when I'm thinking of it, I'm thinking mostly of Black people, the experiences of other minorities within the US, Asian Americans, again, our LGBTQ populations, Latino people. This country is close to being majority minority, if it's not already. And if we want to have a culture, a society, a country that is about lifting people up, about taking care of each other, then we have got to get to know each other. And how do we get to know each other if we cannot and will not have these conversations, or if we're too afraid to, or afraid to some of the time?
That's a really good point, and maybe that leads us to our closing, because the intentionality has to be grounded. The reason why we ask the why, before we do the engagement, I think is an important thing to continually inspect and reinspect time and time again. Because when we ask the why to that offensive comment or story or opinion or whatever, we are causing some red flags for the other person, which naturally can result in hostility or defensiveness. And the relaxation part of it, the embodied relaxation part of it, is to be comfortable with knowing that at some time in my life, I had some form of that too. And if not me specifically, then my country has had some form of that. And there's been a lot of very helpful conversation that we've had here today. And thank you for joining us. Don't forget to click like and subscribe as the Courage to Look project continues to evolve and develop. You'll find out about future projects and offerings. But thank you for joining us, Ellen. Thank you for joining and engaging with Chris and myself. And I just kind of want to end with this thing that suddenly occurred to me. And it's the risk of othering, even those of harmful opinions or actions. And it's a story that the Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron sort of quotes from Rick Field's poem, and goes something like, behind the anger, behind the hardness is the pain. And behind the pain is the sadness. But behind the sadness is the big blue sky. And so just to sign off, we have all been in one another's shoes with our biases, and we are navigating, unveiling that for our future generations. And this is important work to do. And so thank you so much for being with us, Ellen, and having this very candid conversation.
Thank you both.